You know, sometimes I look over my record collection and I think the age of good album art, of great album art, is kind of gone. And I often wonder what bands are thinking when they set about getting cover art sorted for their new album. Well, that task doesn't come with much more responsibility than if you're a band like Morbid Angel. I mean, this is a band we grew up on for a start that's always had dynamic, memorable covers, apart from Heretic, which I guess was some strange orange thing. But that aside, you get my point. Morbid Angel have, of course, just released Kingdoms Disdained, and frankly, here at the Metal Insight podcast, well, we're still digesting it because it's what you might call a high fibre album. It's a bit difficult. But its cover is striking. A big Ent-type creature emerging from a burning sort of post-apocalyptic city. The interesting thing is that image was composed and realised by an Irishman who got the call from Morbid Angel to do the job. His name is Ken Coleman, and this podcast is the story of how he got the gig to do that artwork for one of death metal's most venerable bands. So this is episode 42 of the Metal Insight podcast, produced by MetalIreland.com. I'm Earl Grey. I'm dying with a cold, so I hope you can indulge me through that. I'm sure many of you guys are a bit under the weather as well. But anyway, I want to ask you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, Stitcher, iTunes, whatever. We're also on YouTube now as well, Metal Insight Podcast, all one word in YouTube, if that's easier for you. So without further ado, this is graphic design artist Ken Coleman. And I started by asking him, how the hell do you get to do the cover piece for one of the biggest bands in death metal?
Well, it all kind of started back in about 2011, if you want to go back that far. What happened was Steve Tucker was actually living in Ireland for a while down in Cork, and he was talking to a couple of old mates of mine who were in UCC. And at the time, they said, "Here, have a look at our friend Ken's work." And he basically, a couple of months later, contacted me to do the artwork for the first Warfather album. So I was working with Steve on that back in 2011 for Orchestrating the Apocalypse. A couple of years later, he was bringing out the second Warfather album, The Grey Eminence. So again, I took part in that album cover. But we really expanded upon the artwork then. It wasn't just the front cover, we did a whole load of extra artwork for the inside. And then I think it was around May of last year, about 2016, Steve told me that he was rejoining Morbid Angel and would I be interested in maybe doing some t-shirts for them. And of course, I jumped at the chance to do that, and that's where it went from there. So then he kind of told me, I saw it on the side, that Morbid Angel will be bringing out a new album, and if I wanted to give the artwork a shot. So I spent most of Christmas up until maybe mid-February just starting out with some sketches and doing a lot of concept for this album. I was given no clue as to what the album would be about, except that I knew it was going to start with a K. Trey had mentioned to Steve that he wanted... I hadn't been introduced to anyone else in the band at this point. Trey had mentioned that he wanted something with a red burning city, and I found that to be quite a challenge, actually, simply because if you Google red apocalyptic city images for album covers, there are hundreds.
So that's actually... That's a Google search.
It's quite a common thing. So when I started on it, I was messing with some 3D and just making some kind of abstract images in my own kind of workflow, and trying to get a feel for what it was. And then when a bit more information came from Steve, and he finally told me what the name of the album was going to be, I started looking up the words. So when I looked up the word Kingdoms, and I used the word disdain, and I looked up to Google, I looked up the definition of disdain. And I really liked the fact that it was kind of almost an arrogant judgment. That's what I felt from the word disdain. And it brought me back to the ideas that I know that the band often refer to ancient civilization. And Trey is a big fan of ancient Sumeria and kind of Mesopotamia, stuff like that. So I looked at ancient cultures, and what I found was a very common thread amongst a lot of cultures is, like, if you think about things like Rome or Constantinople, a lot of ancient cultures disintegrated basically because of their own kind of arrogance or their own corruption.
Mm-hmm.
in a more pop culture reference, I was actually thinking about Ghostbusters too. With the whole idea that the evil underneath the city was kind of, it was taking over in a very secretive way and was about to kind of immerse the city or destroy it.
Well, I think Vigo is probably one of the most evil things most of us of a certain age ever saw.
Yeah, exactly. But that I know that's a very much a pop culture reference, but it does go back to the older references of other cities and kind of very apocalyptic, kind of biblical kind of themes, even like the idea of the golden calf or those kind of themes where it was basically when man becomes so arrogant that he will kind of destroy himself.
Yeah.
And it's a theme that often goes through a lot of fantasy novels, and it's kind of that genre. So I kind of looked at that, and that's where the kind of the burning city came from, and the idea of the demon. The demon himself, the idea came from, I was just messing around with a lot of 3D, and just one day it occurred to me, what if he was actually, it was like the city was built on the carcass of an ancient being. If you look at things like, I was kind of looking back to even Castle Grayskull from Master Universe, because one of the original ideas was that it would be actually the skull of a giant, that was turned into a castle, and I was looking at Gondor and Lord of the Rings, stuff like that, with the giant castle, the giant statues, or even Erebor, the way like they sculpted these gigantic statues of the dwarven culture.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking at a lot of that kind of fantasy-based imagery and the ideas behind it, and I thought, what if there was a demon actually under the city? If you took something like Terry Pratchett's Discworld, let's say, and you were looking at the whole idea of Discworld on the back of a giant turtle going through space, tortoise going through space. If you take that idea that maybe the city was actually built on the back of an old demon or some kind of buried large entity, but the corruption and evil of mankind from the city had seeped into the earth. It was so corrosive that it actually brought the demon back to life. So that was the original concept. That's where the idea came from, and I just thought it worked really well later when I started getting in lyrics from for the lyric sheets from Steve and from Trey, simply because some of the songs, with what the content they had in the songs, really kind of fitted in with my idea of the demon.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, well, first there's loads of great stuff there. So first of all, you pretty much deduced all of that from 2 words.
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
Oh, thank you.
And so I suppose the other thing is what's really interesting is that I suppose for the most part in that early time, Steve, I guess, was your sort of interlocutor, and I find that interesting because when I think of Morbid Angel, I mean, I think of Trey's, his very singular vision for the last 25 years. I would have always thought he would have been absolutely I wouldn't have thought he would have been a sort of dictator about stuff like that, but I would have thought that it would have been his very singular vision that would have informed a lot of that. But I'm surprised to hear that maybe Steve had the guiding hand there.
I don't think Steve, it's not that Steve really had the guiding light in the end. I was actually, when I finally got an email from Steve saying, congrats, you're doing the artwork for Morbid Angel, obviously I was delighted. But what was more surprising is when Trey and their management finally came to me and in emails and said, hey, I got just a big introduction email with Steve. What surprised me most was I thought, okay, I'll do this artwork, I'll get the job, but then Trey is going to come in and with the band and with the management, and then they're going to tell me what they actually want on the cover.
Yeah.
So this was kind of showing my idea, my skill set, because when I actually presented to Morbid Angel, it wasn't just the cover I gave them. I gave them a full presentation of how the artwork could be put into t-shirts, different versions of the artwork in different color schemes.
Yeah.
I showed them how I actually took some of the kind of color scape from Blessed Are the Sick
to
create a lot of the fogs and stuff. And looking at the older artwork, I'm looking at Dan Seagrave and stuff like that, because that's iconic for me growing up, that kind of artwork.
Of course.
And using all that as influence and I gave them a full professional presentation of all of this and showed how the artwork then can be animated. I made an animated version of my character in a 5-second loop video, and how it could be used for animation, how it could be used for, I was looking at, the way social media keeps going forward and it's more video based, we have video covers, all this. So everything was laid out, how their artwork would even look at a screen grab for Spotify, why all of this is important. So they got a full media presentation, not just the artwork. So then Trey came back and Steve pretty much said, yeah, that's it. It's 98, 99% there, which I didn't expect. I expected that I would have to take their ideas and start from scratch, and I just basically showed them my skill set to be employed to do this.
Yeah.
But they actually just went with my final concepts.
Wow. It's an incredible wow, it's quite an achievement. I mean, when you mentioned Dan Seagrave there, and we think to Gateways to Annihilation and stuff, and how awesome that was. I mean, Blessed, it's obviously a sort of classical piece, isn't it? And quite an abstract taking from a classical piece, and then Domination's like just some 90s kind of early Photoshop work, on sort of stuff. But when you think to, let's take Gateways and let's take Formulas, for example, they're both lovely painted pieces. Yours diverges from that in as much as it's a little finer. The art it's a bit finer. What in terms of composition? Was it digital or was it paint? How did you go about it?
It's a bit of everything. It's mostly digital. It's very much computer based work. Some people, I have been reading comments on some forums, and some people are on the fence about it because a lot of people do, when they think about Morbid Angel and they think about their favorite kind of songs, their favorite vision of the band.
Yeah.
For a lot of people that have come to me and talked about it, it is Gateways and it is anything to do with Dan Seagrave, because when Steve announced that he was going back with the band, people were thinking back to that era of Morbid Angel with Tucker being in the front.
Yeah.
So they were looking at that artwork and comparing. It is very much digital, but and there are some people who are going, oh, I wish it was painted, and I would prefer if it maybe Dan Seagrave did the artwork. And I got to admit, I'm having quite a learning curve on reading, about what people take on your work, because I've been looking at this for 10 months, and building it up, and it's been kind of my own little secret thing in my computer, and then the only other 2-3 people who've seen it are Steve and Trey and their management, so seeing it out there it almost makes you feel a bit vulnerable, because you're like, oh god, the rest of the world has now seen this, what are they going to say? But it is mostly digital, but the good thing about working digital, some people think, oh, you're cheating or using Photoshop, these guys painted for 6 months. At the end of the day, I was there's not just that one piece of work. There's about 8 panels of artwork.
Yeah.
If anyone who has seen it and opened the booklet is actually the journey of the demon, in a sense, because he actually gets out of the ground and walks the whole way across the landscape and comes back. So if you look through the booklet, he's actually moving across the artwork.
There is an undeniable, pardon me. There is an undeniable link to that sort of Ent type character from Lord of the Rings.
He never. There was a bit of subconscious bit of Treebeard thrown in there. He never was meant to look Entish, but I guess it kind of harks back to that same kind of theme and archetype, because you could look at Lord of the Rings and you can look at the Ents and like they're the shepherds and guardians of the forest, and this guy is almost the antithesis of this. He's just an evil being who was having a sleep, and the next thing, man's corruption again came along and woke him. And that's why the Ents woke up, I guess, too. So
I love as a sort of resistance against industrialization and stuff, and certainly in the Lord of the Rings. But one, you said something there that I really loved, which was that you had this secret that was just on your PC, and that secret happens to be the cover to a Morbid Angel album. I mean, that's a pretty special feeling.
Well, you get used to it. It's not that I'm not excited. I'm obviously stoked that I got the job, but I was excited 10 months ago when I got that email from Tucker to say, you're going doing this. Yeah. And I was like, oh my god, and I was excited and afraid, and at the same time, because it's like this is quite a big thing to be involved in.
Absolutely.
And I remember I telling one of my best mates who originally introduced me to Steve. I remember back in his house it was around 1999, and Terrorizer had brought out an issue that was an art special. So they had there was an interview with the 2 guys who did all the stuff at the time for Lacuna Coil. It was a 2-page spread on Dan Seagrave, looking at guys like Jim Fitzpatrick for doing all the Tin Lizzy work.
I think Dave McLean was in there as well, wasn't he?
Dave McKean was in there.
Yeah.
And who else was in there? Rodney Matthews, guys like this, And I always took an interest in album artwork. I remember down here in Limerick, there was like so many bands coming out back in the early 2000s, and I was playing a bit of drums myself, but I thought, I'd rather devote myself to the design and illustration for metal because, well, I didn't see many other people doing it in Ireland.
Yeah.
And I was loving some of the artwork that was coming out from the likes of Soilwork and Flames at the time.
Yeah.
And that really influenced a lot of my work. So as that grew, I did a lot more artwork for bands in Ireland, and then it kind of moved on to, international bands. And so I guess, coming and looking at back from a 10-year journey to getting to this, like, it's like it sounds very romanticized, but it is quite, I suppose it's cool,
Well, there's no such thing as an overnight success. There's generally 10 years behind them. You mentioned there about getting the lyric sheets and it all starting to come together when you got the lyric sheets. When did you first hear the music? Because that's obviously, you need to know that the art marries with the music. So when did you first hear it?
I had that first track, Piles of Little Arms, that went out on Spotify about a month ago. Yeah. I had that about a week before anyone else, that's all. Mm-hmm. That's the only track. I've had nothing else until I got the CD and the vinyl posted over to me, and I received that last Saturday week.
That's incredible.
So it was all based off just talking with Steve and Trey.
Yeah, and now that you've got the album, I'm going to ask you to step outside your relationship for a second, because I'm just going to ask you to be a Morbid Angel fan for a minute. I'm not sure what I think of the album yet, I must say. I've spun it maybe, I don't know, sort of 3-4 times now, because it's pretty dense, isn't it? And I think there's some really good stuff in it, and then I think, So what do you think of the album, and how is that sort of tainted, or not tainted, but how does that marry with the art that you've made for it?
I think it's incredibly deep and aggressive. I've listened to Piles of Little Arms, like, God knows, I don't know how many times,
Yeah.
In terms of how it fits with the artwork, I haven't really made any kind of... You're asking me to step outside myself, but it's a tough one to do. That'd be a kind of question I could possibly answer in about 6 months when I hadn't been looking at it for 10 months straight.
Yes.
Do you know what? I've given this exercise to my because I'm teaching now as an art lecturer, and I give it to my students. Like, if you don't like a piece of art, or you're working something and you're stumped, you need to step outside yourself. Maybe you put it away and you look at it with fresh eyes a week later.
Mm-hmm.
If I listen to this album again in 6 months' time, I could possibly answer that a lot more honestly.
Yeah.
Just because it's still too fresh in my head.
Absolutely. Tell me this. A lot of people are sort of fascinated. I remember growing up, I was always reading the liner notes for whatever wacky stuff Trey had to say.
Yeah. That was a challenge.
I know.
We had to look at from a design point of view, because I did the layouts too. So we had to think about, right, how many pages are needed for that specific section of the album.
I was just going back over formulas today, because I thought maybe he'd gotten a wee bit more sensible by that point in time, but definitely not. It's like a huge amount of elaborate text. But what was your sense of Trey, the guy? Obviously he's completely into his own mythos, his own way of thinking, his own, Deepak Chopra and Anthony Robbins and everything in between. What was the sense you got of him as a dude?
I think one thing I really did appreciate is Trey is he's very direct in his emails. He tells you, as you thought about the one side division, as you mentioned about Trey having the kind of control of the band. He doesn't mess about when it comes to, like, oh, maybe this will work. He just goes, I don't like that, I do like this. As an artist, that really does help as well, because you've no one kind of going, oh, maybe we'll change this. You're like, tell me what you want or what you don't want. I want to be on the right path here. And he was very good at laying out that kind of path,
Yeah.
But what I did find really interesting and gave me quite a buzz is when I finally did get the lyrics to the songs, like looking at track 5 there, Archetypes. Architects, sorry. I actually had all the list of songs, and I still only know them by the code words rather than the full names. So Little Piles, or Piles of Arms, was written in my thing, and then Architect was track 5.
And Warped was doing the rounds for a while, wasn't it? Before it became Paradigms Warped.
Yeah, there was a lot of just code words on the names of the songs, and some of the guys actually had to go back themselves and go, what track is that again? What are we calling that? And so the lyric sheets went back and forth quite a lot before they could be finalized in the artwork. But when I read the lyrics to Architects, and he's an architect and iconoclast, I couldn't believe how close that was to my thinking when I was creating the character. So I could just imagine doing this crazy, like I can imagine him like getting out of the ground chanting this, that song. So that was quite a buzz to see how the artwork really fit in to where they were going, just by chance. And also reading Trey's sheet, reading his thank yous, I thought was great as well, because he's got so many pop culture references that are in there. Like I've mentioned Lord of the Rings, and I've mentioned all these kind of pop culture references that helped with the work for me. But to see the Trey was into kind of along the same stuff, because Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. You know? So that kind of stuff kind of really kind of, for me, was like, yes, the guys are on the same wavelength here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I do like about the album is I'm actually a big fan of the production. It's very natural feeling to me, and it sounds, the way the guitar and the bass kick drums work together, it's really, crunchy and brown and soily. It's really quite organic sounding. I know that's an overused word, but and the fact that marries with basically a sort of big naturalistic creature, I think that quite works well together.
Yeah, as I said, I'll give you a better answer in about 6 months. But I remember when I just heard the start of Piles of Little Arms, it was just like, blown away. And the thing about it is, I don't know if you've ever noticed the difference between listening to it on Spotify or if you actually have a full, uncompressed song on iTunes or whatever. Like, when you listen to that song, and you just hear the blast at the start.
Yeah.
It just goes through you, and you're like, whoa, that's some heavy stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of your own sort of Morbid Angel background, what would be? I'm guessing your favorite artwork is maybe Gateways, and I know certainly the sound in this album harks back to Gateways big time. Because of Tucker primarily, but the riffing style as well. But would it be Gateways would be your favorite?
Yeah, I would have been listening to Gateways back in about. What year? 2000 when it came out. Yeah.
Gateways, yeah.
I'll be very honest though. The one thing that I'm so into the art of music, and working in that thing, I am terrible. I am very, very bad for telling you the names of songs.
Yeah.
It's just one. I just never. I always would. Oh yeah, I love track 5 off that album, or track 2 and whatever, that kind of thing. I was very bad for names. I'm getting a bit better because we have a visual now, constant visual reference.
Well, do you think?
I know with someone who was the opposite. He knew all the lyrics, and he had kind of an eidetic memory. He just knew everything in text. Where I was like, I like the cover on that one.
Yeah. Do you think this will? I mean, hopefully, obviously, this will bring your name to wider acclaim, and maybe more people will start coming to you now. But are we allowed to know? Is there anything coming in the pipeline? Have you got anything up your sleeve for some other bands that we might like?
There's still a bit to do with the guys in terms of merchandise, and I can't really say more than that.
Sure.
In terms of other bands, I just want to see what happens.
Yeah.
See where it goes from there. I can't say much more than that.
No, I appreciate it. I thought that might be the case. How much of a drag is it? You mentioned earlier something very, very important that a lot of bands will be confronting at the moment, and certainly, I run a website and whatnot, and I know the importance to me of getting the right profile of artwork for the right image in the right space across multiple formats. It's an absolute ball ache. How much of a nightmare is it for you as a creative artist? Making your art so that it fits into a Facebook header dimension, a portrait, a landscape, a magazine. You've got to basically get the Goldilocks dimension. You've got to get the best bit of your art into the Goldilocks dimensions. I mean, that must be such a pain in the ass as a creative spirit.
I'm used to working in those formats now. I'm used to knowing that I'm going to need about only 75% of a square from my image, and the other 25% is going to be devoted to text. But when the special edition comes out in February, I ended up having to repaint the entire front cover, and not the main section, but I did it as a full wrap for a box. So I ended up having to create a load more Rune Cities and move it around. And that was a bit like, and also another part of the challenge was the CD. The Digipack has a lenticular print cover, which is like the 3D effect. Like that was quite a challenge, because whether you're a digital artist or painter, that work has to be recreated in a certain format and 3 or 4 layers that it can be sent to a specific company. But the good thing about digital work is, having experience as a graphic designer, you can kind of envision where the work is going to go and how it needs to be laid out. If you do get your hands on a vinyl of Kingdoms Disdained, when you open it up fully, the artwork continues the whole way across the back. So I actually created most of the artwork that it was a double page spread.
Yeah.
So it's kind of big, long landscape layouts.
Yeah.
With them, as I said, the demon in different positions. But yeah, there was quite a challenge, because then when the record company kind of steps in and goes, okay, we're using this artwork in this way, it's going to be released in these formats. There's a lot you have to take in. For instance, the black logo was a very much kind of up in the air for quite a while.
Yeah, that is so strange. I think that's one of the most shocking things about this cover. It's like nobody's ever seen Morbid Angel's logo really in black before, with a black
The other thing
surround.
is that I fully created the logo as a 3D model.
Yeah.
First, so the logo was actually fully rotatable in 3D software, and it was created with black oil textures and then put back into. So I gave the logo in about 10 different versions over to Trey and Steve and their management to take a look at first, and they came back just liking, black with there's a sliver of shade of light in there,
Yeah.
So it's a very corrosive. It's quite an evil black. You mightn't look it in print, but if you see it on my machine, what work was done to it, I can appreciate that. There's a lot went into getting the logo to that. But then, you'd expect maybe it was obviously done. One of the first pitches was done with just a white logo, maybe a little bit of a shadow or a black outline.
Yeah.
And but I think in the end the black logo kind of really adds to the.
Well, it speaks to the intensity.
This,
it speaks to the darkness and the intensity of the particular music. It really does. You are really well placed. There'll be people listening to this, particularly bands, demo bands, and young graphic designers and stuff. What is the thing people really need to realize about their demo artwork? Right? What do people really need to realize about that? That what's the advice you could give them?
My experience with bands, and this isn't just in metal, this goes across the board with working with all types of music, is if you're a young demo band and you go to an artist to get your artwork done, you need to step away from how precious you are about your music, for one, because if I give you an example of something that's happened to me recently, I worked away on that for 10 months with Morbid Angel. Biggest project I've done in terms of amount of artwork, the amount of hours, the amount of layout, the amount of back and forth with both management and record company, and also it was financially a bigger project than most other projects that I would do. But I did a small project for a group here in Ireland. Everyone's going to remain nameless in this. Very small budget, their first EP, and I said, okay, I'll do it for a couple of bucks, and just help you out. I'll do your layouts and I'll do your artwork. That was a bigger pain in the ass than it was for me to do work for Morbid Angel, because Morbid Angel are going 20 years, they know what they want.
Yeah.
You work with a new band who are holding on for dear life, and all their ego and all of their everything goes into this album. And you have 4 people, maybe the drummer doesn't like it, maybe someone else doesn't like it. It's a very small budget. I can appreciate that bands don't have money after they spend so much money on their recording and their mastering and their production. But you have to kind of step out of it and go, guys, I'm doing this for 200 quid and I've spent 10 weeks on this and you still haven't made up your mind.
Yeah.
You got to either go with it or not, or get someone else.
Yeah.
Because I'm not busting my balls for $200 doing 40 hours a week on your work.
Absolutely.
And the band are still going, oh yeah, but we want it to look like this or that because that's who we are. It's like, come back to me in 20 years time and see what you said to me. You know?
Yeah, indeed.
So young bands are very precious. So they have to realize when they're working with somebody else outside of that just to be a bit more aware of that, because for someone like me, I find that it's not that I'm never working with young bands again. I'm on this professional level, I'm staying there. I always love working with younger bands because I hear some great music as well, coming out from young bands. And there's some bands I just heard their demo or something, and I just want to work with them.
Yeah.
I did some work back in, I think it was 2011, for Shattered Skies.
Oh yeah.
We did the artwork fairly quickly, but I cannot stop listening to them still. You know,
Yeah.
I'm delighted when I saw them on Spotify. You know,
Mm-hmm. Wise
their
words.
stuff is awesome.
I'm sure a lot of people will be listening to that and might make them think twice actually. And wise words. What are you? What's your favorite kind of art at the moment? I mean, I've been, I don't know. It's kind of hard to pick out good stuff at the moment, but oh God, I can't even think about it now. I'm asking you, but what's the best art you've seen recently?
Recently, do you know what's funny? Actually, recently it's not what art I'm looking at. It's what new techniques are out there and what software is doing what.
Yeah.
Looking at programs outside of, let's say, Photoshop, and just seeing different styles that are coming out of it. I'm actually looking back at different artists from the past. I'm looking at a lot of people using sfumato. I'm looking at Caravaggio, but I'm mixing it up with a bit of Brocchi and Francis Bacon. You know, that kind of.
Hey, you mentioned De Brocchi and Bacon, right? If you merge those two things, there was this. I don't know if you ever saw this artist. She was incredible. Her name was Marion Kim, and she did the art for Incantation, the first bunch of Incantation records, and it's like Bacon and Le Brocchi. It's all these. Oh man, go check it out if you haven't seen it.
Okay.
Marion Kim, yeah, and she did the first Incantation records. But yeah, that sort of like slightly more abstract and harsh.
Yeah, like covers like cover that really stood out to me this year was last year's Behemoth's new album.
Okay.
That face was just like, you know, it was so black.
Yeah.
And it was just this evil face.
I must go and check that out.
Style.
Yeah, I must go and check that out.
I think it was Behemoth. Was it the Satanist?
Right.
That album, that was just unbelievable. I could have been wrong now. As I said, you can usually reference a band by the cover, the image, rather than the. It just came into my head there, but I thought it was great. And again, there's something you said there about trying to kind of you have to work within constraints with artwork. So if you look at, you do look at Spotify, a lot of bands, bigger logos and less artwork.
Yeah.
But what I have noticed with a lot of bands that I like is the styles are changing quite a lot. Like In Flames went down a very much more colourful style after years of kind of using abstract whites.
Well, it was almost like they went from a very sort of crisp, modern, clean look to a very comic book illustration style, didn't it?
But if you look back even further, like Jester Race was very old school.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
The old school logo.
Yeah.
Then they went all kind of that modern style where people were using like serif fonts. It's like Ridley Scott had all of a sudden designed all the logos for the bands in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
you know?
Dark Tranquility and stuff, you know, Soilwork and all. Yeah.
Soilwork did something very similar with Natural Born Chaos.
Yeah.
I love that cover. And that was actually designed by Carlos de Loma Lombard. Sorry, I can never pronounce his name. He was their synth player, and I got in contact with him on Facebook then years later, telling him how I love his art, and blah, blah. So he was a good guy to talk to, you know.
Yeah,
but he ended up doing a load of their artwork, and then it went into, I think, after the early 2000s with that kind of really nice style. I remember then there was a load of stuff coming up that was just bad Photoshop, not from those specific bands, but in general there's a flood in the market, and now it feels like it's gone back to again around to a kind of a more digital but painterly style. You know? There's a lot more bands out there now who've gone back to, like, I love Sabaton's new artwork, stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, Raymond Swanland, who's an artist who's been working in the game and movie industry for years, ended up doing a lot of work on metal band covers. And then another one of my favourite artists, Android Jones, did Sepultura's cover.
That was a strange cover, wasn't it? That was a really strange cover.
That's his style. I thought it was strange it was on a Sepultura album.
Yeah.
But I knew it was him straight away because he's been a big inspiration on my work. You know?
Yeah. It's always good when you can pick some, you know, you don't even know what it is, but you know it's that person. You know, it's like if you saw a Typo Negative cover, you just kind of know it was Typo Negative, you know, or Swans or something.
Funnily enough, you say that about style. There was a time, there's two sides to being an artist in working with bands. When I mentioned the young bands earlier, bands would often come to me before and go, we are this type of band and we sound like these guys. Can you make us in photos and in our artwork resemble these guys, because we want to obviously visually be referencing our... The team and the genre that we're in. Yeah. Okay. And that goes across the board. It could be a band or like a cover band who want to play stuff like, I don't know, Blur, you know, or Oasis, and the next thing you have a metal band that want to look like they want their artwork to look like Metallica and their logo to look like Metallica.
Yes.
But then Steve Tucker came along, and after looking at my website, he going, no, I don't want you to emulate anyone else. I want you. I want your style.
Yes.
Because he'd seen my abstract, my personal work, and he wanted me, like, for when we did Orchestrating the Apocalypse, it was based on what I do, not what anybody else wants me to do for them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that was a really nice touch, because that's like this superstar in the world of death metal you've been hearing about since you were a kid, and all of a sudden he's like, I want you for your style.
Yeah.
So that gave me quite a lift of confidence, you know.
So that was Ken Coleman. I'm sure you'll agree there was a ton of stuff in there that was really interesting and useful. It's really nice to get a sense of how this kind of stuff happens. Check out the Metal Insight Podcast's home. Check out the Metal Insight Podcast's home at metalireland.com, where you've got some of the biggest and most important releases covered this month, like we just did Enslaved there. Bit of a contentious album, that new Enslaved. I don't really think it's that good, but anyway. And just to say, there's a couple of gigs I got to tell you about. The UK Foo Fighters will be playing Belfast's Limelight on December 15th and Dublin Academy on December 16th. Gary Newman, always a great live show. Gary Newman, I've seen him now a couple of times. It's a really, really fantastic live show. He's just announced a big gig at the Dublin Olympia for March 29, 2018. The Front Bottoms play Dublin's Vicar Street on February 13th, Belfast's Mandela Hall on February 14th. So the next podcast, and I'm really excited about this, the next podcast is with Chelsea Wolfe after her brilliant Hiss Spun album, which just is an incredible album. So make sure you check that out. That'll be up maybe next week. If you want to advertise in this podcast, just email me. That's mi@metalireland.com, mi@metalireland.com. I'm Earl Grey, and this has been the Metal Insight Podcast, episode 42. Thanks for listening.